We have a motion there.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those are adopted. We have a new board member. And I thought, Chris would introduce Chris.
So I'm very excited to welcome Krista Bolt to the ILS board. Chris is a nomination of the New York State Association of Counties. And I will be honest with you.
Is that aftershocks? That's the therapy show. It's telling us to say everything.
Okay, that is already in the house. Okay.
Yeah. We're going to remain in this.
The aftershock.
That's effective building education.
But I will be honest with you and say that, the nomination came from NISAC, in part because they graciously reached out to me and asked for some suggestions. And I did suggest Chris, I think I first met you, was it in 2016?
Yep.
That you, so Chris took over as county administrator in Washington County, which was one of the Harrell Herring settlement counties. And understandably, as a defendant of the lawsuit, Washington County, people were still a little bit unsettled about the litigation and what the settlement meant. And so Chris's initial meetings with ILS, there was some understandable skepticism of our role and settlement implementation. But what I really appreciated about Chris is that he asked wonderful questions, listened, and really, I think, really came to value the importance of public defense and became really just a strong ally in the work that we were doing in Washington County. And then he transitioned to Ontario County as county administrator, another Harrell Herring settlement county, and continued to really just be a very strong ally in understanding the importance and value of public defense and supporting the work of his public defense providers and the Harrell Herring settlement implementation. And it's not been without, some struggles, which we're currently experiencing with the funding issue. But I'm very excited to have Chris and is a member of the board. And, given his experience, I think he'll have a lot to contribute to the work of the board and to ILS.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. We're glad to have you. Thank you. We'll have somebody from the counties without counties.
I had to look at the map to see where Washington was.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Right, next on to the budget.
Yes, so I was hoping that alert we just got on our phones was breaking news about, but unfortunately, as of April 1st, which was the statutory constitutional deadline for the state fiscal year, we do not yet have a final enacted budget for fiscal year 24-25. Yesterday, the state legislature passed a budget extender through this coming Monday. That will continue to fund the operations of the state as well as its other obligations. We do anticipate that there will be further extenders that are passed, before we have a final enacted budget. But we're very hopeful that there will be some resolution on that in the next few weeks, and certainly by the time we meet again in June, where we can provide the board with a more thorough update about where everything stands. At the moment, ultimately for ILS, this means we don't yet know how the final enacted budget is going to compare to the executive budget proposal that the governor released back in January. We do know that the executive budget proposal that the governor put out did differ from the ILS budget request that this board approved back in September. And the three most significant differences, which were the focus of Patricia's budget testimony at the joint legislative budget hearing on public protection back in January. It's also been the focus of advocacy efforts by New York State Defenders Association, Chief Defenders of New York State, and others. The three significant differences from the executive budget proposal and ILS's budget request. First, the executive budget proposal did not include the 3% cost of living adjustment for the long-standing ILS programs that have been held flat in terms of funding for a number of years now. That's the ILS Distributions and Grants Program, the Harrell Herring Settlement Program, and the Harrell Herring Statewide Program. So that 3% COLA was not in the executive budget proposal. Second, the executive budget proposal also did not include the $50 million that we were seeking for improved quality parent representation as part of a 3-year phase-in to a total of $150 million on an annual basis to allow ILS to disperse funding to all counties in New York City on a non-competitive basis to ensure that providers of mandated legal representation of parents and family court can meet compliance with ILS caseload standards. And in fact, the governor's executive budget proposal actually reduced the proposed amount of funding for ILS for parent representation compared to last year's final enacted budget, where we received a total of $14.5 million appropriated for parent representation. The governor's proposing $4.5 million in this upcoming fiscal year. And then third, the executive budget proposal also includes budget language that authorizes and directs the transfer of a total of $234 million from the Indigent Legal Services Fund to the state's general fund. And I'll refer to that now as a sweep of funding. I think that's the terminology that a lot of the advocacy around this has focused on. Essentially, this would allow the state, at the direction of the State Division of Budget Director, to move up to that $234 million out of the Indigent Legal Services Fund, which I think, as everyone here knows, is the special fund that is the funding source for the vast majority of the funding that ILS disperses to counties, as well as the functions of the Office of Indigent Legal Services itself. Part of our messaging, certainly around the executive budget proposal, is that one of the main issues is that the failure to fund our parent representation request, accompanied by the proposal to sweep funding from Indigent Legal Services Fund, really sends a negative signal to counties across the state and to providers of mandated representation, as to the state's ongoing commitment to fund mandated legal representation. So that's the executive budget proposal. Where we are right now in terms of the budget process is, the executive is currently in budget negotiations with the Senate and the Assembly. Earlier in March, the Senate and the Assembly each introduced their so-called one house budget proposals. These were their responses to the executive budget. And all of this is summarized in the one pager that we included with the meeting agenda. In short, the Senate did propose in their one house budget to fund the $50 million for parent representation and to reject the sweep of the ILS fund. So we were very gratified to see that. The Senate proposal, though, in all other meaningful ways, did align with the executive budget proposal. So there was no 3% COLA for the other programs. And then the Assembly, we were disappointed to see, accepted the executive proposals when it came to everything that impacts ILS. So, right now we're in a period of time where we don't know much publicly about where things stand with conversations around budget negotiations for funding that impacts ILS. But we do understand that those discussions are ongoing, and throughout this entire process over the last couple of months, ILS has and continues to be in contact with the legislature, legislative staff, governor's office, and the Division of Budget. And we've been aided in those efforts by advocates like NYSDA and CDA-NY, New York State Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and others who have been circulating sign-on letters, building up support in the legal community to both support our funding requests and to oppose, again, that proposed sweep of the ILS fund. So that's it in a nutshell, and happy to entertain any questions.
What do we do?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
You've had conversations with Chuck Levine and everybody.
Yeah. So, we continue our efforts and our conversations in reaching out to legislatures, central staff, governor's office. We internally are having conversations about what this means, going forward. And continue, we're continuing the work and working with the counties on developing plans for using, the budgets for the next contract, and, all the other contract, several different contracts at play. So we continue to move the ball forward in terms of making sure that the funding that has been appropriated is being dispersed, is being spent, and is being claimed. And Burton will talk a little bit more about that, later in the meeting when he talks about some of the awards that we granted last year. But I really, we're just trying to figure out how, what are the leverage points that we can all be pressing? How can we help people understand the constitutional implications of a budget, which I think sometimes people don't fully grasp. And so that's what we're really trying to stress. And again, Burton said this, and I want to reiterate this. We really appreciate the work of the Chief Defender Association of New York. NISTA, and Susan is here from the New York State Defenders Association, and other allies, and also, messaging that and messaging the importance of ILS being fully funded, getting the appropriation that we requested, which is modest. I mean, we talked about that at the September board meeting, and not not taking the funds and using it for a purpose that's contrary to the statute that created the special fund.
What's the dollar cost of a COLA?
It's a good question. I think it ended up being around $27 million in total
Yeah.
across the 3 programs.
For the 3.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And then if you had to rank the sort of 3 things, right, the sweep, the COLA, and the 50 million in order of importance to ILS, how would you rank them?
I'm going to defer to,
The funding needs to be appropriated. We need the funding.
The 50.
Yeah, we need the 50, and I would also say the 3% increase for settlement implementation. Post-budget request, we've been working with the 5 settlement counties, and we realized that the 3% increase that we asked for wasn't enough. The 5 settlement counties are really struggling to use the funding that's available to continue and build upon the wonderful work that they have done in implementing the settlement. And their funding has been flat for the longest period of time. So I would say the imperative is the funding for parent representation and the COLA. Like it to be more actually than a COLA increase for the settlement counties. The sweep is almost like sort of like twisting the knife in the wound. And not just saying, it's not just that we're not going to honor our budget request, which was, a very well thought out, data-driven budget request, but instead we're going to take the money and use it for different purposes. And that's, that's sort of, making sort of escalating the crisis in the first 2 priorities, I guess is another way to say it.
And how much of that money is IOLA funds?
None of it comes from IOLA funds. So the ILS fund right now, the Indigent Legal Services Fund, is in very good fiscal shape. There's a lot of money in the fund. Now, a lot of that money is to cover the settlement and its expansion statewide and the reappropriations, because the counties and New York City have been spending, but haven't, the claiming the funding hasn't kept pace with the spending. And so that money is basically allocated to reimburse the counties for expenditures that they have already made.
That's the fund that comes from attorney registration fees and some vehicle and traffic fees.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, just to recap, the ILS fund, you know, Burton has done a nice job of explaining this to me. It's a special fund means two things. One is for a special purpose, a designated purpose, and two, the fund revenues are designated as well. And so the ILS fund is primarily funded through the Office of Court Administration's criminal history record that they sell. So that's about a significant portion of the fund, in addition to a percentage of the attorney biannual registration fees. So those two together account for about, 80% of the fund revenues. And then the rest of the revenues are some vehicle and traffic fines and fees, and then the fee that somebody has to pay to terminate a license suspension.
There have been prior attempts under other governors to sweep, and they've always been opposed. I don't know if they've ever actually done a sweep.
It has occurred, nothing to this level, this dollar amount.
And then if you had to handicap your chances of success on each of the three,
It's a good question as well. I dare not put myself in the mind and the shoes of the powers that be when it comes to reaching a decision. I'm certainly very hopeful that there will be more than the $4.5 million proposed for parent representation. If that's what we ended up with, if we got what was in the executive budget proposal, that would mean we would not be able to issue any new funding for parent representation this year. So at a minimum, we're hopeful that there will be more than that, but it remains to be seen. We were in a situation last year where, once again, the Senate was one of the only parties at the table in budget negotiations in terms of, supporting our budget requests, and we did end up with more than may have otherwise been suggested from where the executive and assembly were.
anyone else? Okay, we're on to the annual report.
So pursuant to Executive Law 833, which is the statute that creates the ILS board, every year the ILS board is to issue a report to be sent to the Senate, the Assembly, and the executive. And so each year we draft the report and submit it to the board for the board to approve, to review and decide whether or not to approve or approve with amendments. And so this year, it's our 12th annual report and it covers calendar year 2023. And I just want to give an overview of the report. And I'm not going to go over every section of the report. I know that when I was working on the report and reviewing it, I got tired. It just really, for me, instilled in me, again, the reminder of the great work that, my staff at ILS does. But I did want to talk about two themes that I think emerged from the report and that are related. One is the theme of substantial change, as well as the theme of substantial growth. And like I said, they're related. With regard to change, ILS is constantly looking to improve the work that we do and how we achieve our mission, and also looking to improve how we work with the counties in New York City. In some ways, we want to ensure that we're providing the best customer service possible. And so to that end, in 2023, the Harrell Herring Settlement Team and the Harrell Herring Statewide Team, in anticipation of the settlement monitoring period ending, worked together to integrate the two teams. And the goal was to have a team that was fully responsive to the work of settlement implementation across the state, fully responsive to the counties, with each ILS attorney working with counties, having designated counties with which to work, so that those counties would know who is their first point of contact. You know, because sometimes that's the hardest thing when you're navigating systems, right? It's particularly when you're navigating a state agency, is who's your point of contact. And it's really important to us that the counties feel like they know. And so the two teams integrated into one criminal defense representation unit or team, with Nora Christensen as the chief attorney for that team, and then two deputy chiefs, Jen Chen Yu and Claire Zartarian. And then underneath them, the attorneys working most directly with the counties. And the attorneys working with the counties have no more than 7 counties as their counties that they're working with. And the counties are sort of positioned in a regional way, so that the attorneys sort of can have a regional view. This team integration also fully incorporated the Western New York Regional Support Center. So they're part of the team, but they get 8 counties instead of just 7. And they're responsible for the counties in Western New York. So that was an important change. Another change was our grants unit, looking very carefully at some of the approaches that they're taking, both with regard to contracts, issuing contracts, and also managing and reviewing claims for reimbursement. And so our grants unit is moving more towards doing things electronically. So now counties can send us signed contracts electronically. They don't have to mail them. Some still prefer mail, so we'll take the mailed version if that's what you prefer. But and we can issue the contracts electronically. But with regard to our claims for reimbursement, and under the direction of Burton, a lot of work was done to look at the process that we had been using, which I would say was essentially a desk audit of every claim. And to realize that consistent with the Office of State Comptroller policies, you don't have to do a desk audit of every claim. And so we revised our claims review policy, made it more streamlined, but still maintained fiscal accountability through some other measures, including occasionally, like doing desk audits occasionally of claims, and also we're seeking to improve our on-site audit functions, so that we can still ensure that there's that fiscal accountability, but make it much more streamlined for counties to submit claims for reimbursement. And then simultaneously, we also moved to submitting, we don't pay the claims directly, we submit them to, basically OGS that sends the claims to the counties. And so we transitioned to doing that electronically as well. So that means that claims are being processed faster and the money is getting to the counties faster. And we're hoping that it also makes it easier for the counties to send claims to ILS. So this was a lot of change in some of our processes in our policies. In addition to that change, we had the extraordinary growth. And in 2023, we added 15 new staff members to ILS. So bringing the number of staff members from 49 at the end of 2023 to, what had been 35 at the end of 2022. Most of these new staff members filled newly created positions. There were some attrition, so some of them filled, previous positions, but almost all of them, it was newly created positions. So for example, our statewide appellate support center had opened its doors in 2022, but not fully staffed. And in 2023, they brought on 3 new staff members so that now they're at the end of 2023, it was a fully staffed unit. Our Western New York Regional Support Center opened its doors in mid-2023 with Ian Harrington as our chief attorney for the support unit. And even though, it wasn't, by the end of 2023, it wasn't fully staffed, but it was adding, he was soon joined by a couple additional staff members. Our family representation unit also expanded. We backfilled the position that was vacated when Lucy McCarthy was elevated to the director of family representation. We backfilled that position and then added a program associate position as well. Our research unit also expanded, adding a position to focus on family court research. And we hired somebody within the family court unit, a data officer for that position, and then had to backfill that position. And then our grants unit added new positions as well. And then finally, we also added an assistant IT director. So a lot of work done in 2023 internally in office functioning, all of it designed to help us do a better job on pursuing our mission of improved quality mandated representation and a better job of working with the counties in New York City. So that's looking back at 2023. I want to pause for a second and look forward, because all of this change can be hard on an office, and it can be a little bit unsettling. And, Bert and I have had a lot of conversations with staff, and come to the realization that for 2024, we really need to focus on who we have working for us now and working to ensure that we have a culture of collaboration where every staff person feels that their experience, their expertise, their backgrounds and their contributions are fully honored. And we know that there's going to have to be some hard conversations in the future about, people's experiences over this past year and, all of this change happening all at once. And also because the reality is that type of self-reflection and self-interrogation that we need to do can always be hard. But I'm actually energized and excited about doing it. And the reason I am is because, one, I just know how vitally important and valuable our mission is. And, I also know, number two, that every person in our office feels that sense of mission and feels that deep commitment to it, as well as a keen sense of who at the end of the day is impacted by it, right? And that's the low-income people who are arrested for criminal offenses and low-income parents who are facing certain family court matters. So while I understand that there will be some hard conversations in the future, I really am looking forward to the work that we're going to be doing in 2024 to really build upon what we did in 2023. So having said that, I want to pause and give people an opportunity to ask any questions about the 2023 annual report or make any comments about it or ask for any amendments to the report, because it's your report.
Trisha, you said a question, you talked a lot about the office. What's the status of remote versus in-person
That's a good question.
at the office?
So we do allow people to work up to 50% remotely. And I think that's working well for our office. And there's actually some research out there about remote work and remote work in an environment like ours, which involves a lot of problem solving, can have its downsides. But the research is really suggests that 40 to 50% remote is the sweet spot, because it gives people a sense of that the agency respects their personal lives, right? And their, some of the issues that are involved with coming to work. But it also allows for people to still be in the office and have that informal sort of meetings and that informal communication, which often generates some of the best problem solving. And I noticed that for ILS, we have some what I call dense days, like Tuesdays or Wednesdays are the days that people tend to be in. So those are my favorite days to be in the office because you feel the sense of energy in the office. And so what we're hearing from staff is that tends to work well.
And is the number of hires that you had, is the physical space that you have in Albany large enough, or because there's so much remote, is it able to have more people working in less space?
Yeah, we currently have enough space. I would not say that our space is optimal because right now we're spread out over 3 floors in the Alfred E. Smith building. And so,
Like contiguous?
no. So we have the 11th floor, the 29th floor, and the 30th floor. And that detracts from the goal of having people have those informal conversations. So with our current space, we could accommodate a couple new positions, but at some point in the future, we're going to have to be looking for new space.
I remember the early days going to visit the office, and there was just a lot of empty space and boxes and not enough people because they hadn't
Yeah,
done a lot of the hiring.
yeah,
It's good that we're getting fully staffed.
yeah.
And is morale good? Is morale in the office?
That's a really good question. I think that's what we want to focus on. I don't want to say it's bad, but I do believe it can be better. I was talking to the chief judge about this beforehand. I think sometimes when there's a lot of change at once, that's really unsettling for people. So we need to focus on and really working on those issues and addressing the concerns that people have. So, but while I think morale could be better, again, the one thing I never question is just the sheer talent and commitment of people in the office. Like I'm constantly impressed by the work product I see, people's willingness to go above and beyond, people's energy in taking on new projects. I know that means a lot to me that there's always that energy and excitement to do that.
There's no other questions. We do need to approve. Report.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Vote. Great. Thank you.
All right, so for the next agenda item, for the benefit of folks who've been here for a while and some of the newer additions to the board, one of the board's responsibilities under Executive Law 853 is approving the allocation of funds from ILS that are to be dispersed to the counties and in New York City. And over the last couple of years, it's been the practice of the board to approve that allocation plan at the June board meeting. So last June, the ILS board approved an allocation plan for funding that was appropriated in last year's state budget. And that allocation plan included the issuance of 3 competitive grants. So we just wanted to provide the board with an update on those 3 competitive grants in particular. The first of the 3 was the 3rd Regional Immigration Assistance Center, or REAC grants. These are grants that are intended to ensure that all non-citizen clients who receive legally mandated representation in New York State are provided accurate and comprehensive advice about any immigration consequences of their cases, ensuring that the representation is in compliance with the standards set forth by the Supreme Court in Padilla versus Kentucky. So we issued that RFP back in July. We have 6 regions established for these REACs in New York. One of the regions, New York City, we issue on a non-competitive basis because the city of New York is the only possible contract holder for for that grant. But for the 5 competitive regions, we received thoughtful proposals from each region and were able to issue the awards to Ontario County, Onondaga County, Albany County, Westchester County, and Suffolk County. And those are for contracts that will run through the end of 2026, at which point we anticipate we would be issuing a new round of REACT grants, of course, subject to appropriations by the state and approval of an allocation plan by the board. The second of the 2 RFPs that we issued in 2023 was for the 3rd Family Defense Quality Improvement and Caseload Reduction Grant. In a nutshell, those are grants encouraging counties to develop innovative programs and practices to reduce caseloads and improve the quality of mandated legal representation provided to parents in child welfare proceedings. Lucy McCarthy will be speaking as one of the later agenda items on some of the programmatic impacts of this funding and the implementation of it. But we issued again that RFP in September of last year. This was the 3rd round of these grants that we issued an RFP for. This year was notable in that we did change the eligibility requirements slightly from the first 2 rounds that we had issued. First, we wanted to ensure that we were getting this funding to as many counties as possible, given the widespread need for parent representation funding. So we did limit eligibility to counties that were not currently receiving either the first or second round of the grants. And second, we opened up the grants for this round to New York City, which had been ineligible to receive the first 2 rounds of grants. So that process played out. We received again a number of proposals, more proposals than we were able to issue awards for. But we were able to issue a total of 8 contracts of up to $750,000 over 3 years. And those contracts, which will be going out shortly, will run through again December 31st of 2026. And the awardees were Allegheny County, Chemung County, Livingston County, Madison County, New York City, Schuyler County, Sullivan County, and Washington County. And then the third of the back-to-back-to-back RFPs that we issued was for a 3rd Upstate Model Family Representation Office RFP. This is funding to establish a model office that will implement standards and best practices for the representation of parents in child welfare proceedings. This is one single award of $870,000 a year for 3 years. In this case, we issued the RFP in November. We are currently at the point where we received proposals. Again, we received far more proposals than we were able to issue the 1 award for, which again speaks to the need for this type of funding, the appetite for this funding, and the ideas that counties across the state have for utilizing this type of funding. We have scored the proposals. We have tentatively made an award for that RFP. We are still waiting for official procurement record approval from the comptroller, so I'm not sure if we're ready to announce who the awardee will be.
We sent out an email.
Oh, we did send out an email. So in this case, Westchester County was the awardee. They previously held the first round of the Upstate Model Family Representation Office. So this will allow a seamless continuation of the program that they had built up over the past several years. And again, we're waiting for the final procurement record approval to actually issue the contract, but the programs will continue seamlessly in the meantime. So as I said, back to back RFPs, that is more than I believe we've ever done. 3 consecutive RFPs is more than we've ever done in a particular year. And we really appreciate the counties and the providers working through that, because there was a lot of interest across the state in all 3 of these. And there is significant work that needs to go into developing proposals that are consistent with the terms of the RFP. So we recognize that a lot of work goes into it, even when ultimately counties do not receive these awards. And I do want to give a quick note of appreciation as well for the ILS staff who help make these RFPs happen, because it's a lot of work administratively for our office. And I want to give a special shout out to my assistant counsel, Jamie Blair, who's really become our in-house expert on issuing RFPs, assembling scoring teams, and really quarterbacking the process of doing scoring in a way that is ensuring that we are being as objective as possible in reviewing the proposals that come in and are adhering to the state finance law requirements that come with issuing competitive funding. And I'm going to do a quick run through as well of shouting out the ILS staff who have participated in these scoring teams over the past year. Brendan Keller, Emily Lusignan, Luchelli Chasunka, Riley Weinstein, Kira Scatino, Jimmy Farrell, Lucy McCarthy, Kelly Egan, and then we also had assistance from Adele Fine from Monroe County as a non-ILS staffer who assisted with one of these. So with that, if there are any questions. Sure.
I agree with you, Burton, on the fact that ILS has never done 3 RFPs in a year. And certainly for the providers in Ontario County, as well as for a number of the colleagues that I'm very close with across the state, they were very overwhelmed with that number of RFPs coming up in 1 year. So I think it's very telling that you got more applications than you could fund for each of those when they were all very overwhelmed by the fact that they were having to do this back to back to back. That's not their bailiwick, right? They want to be in the courtroom. They want to be providing defense to their clients. But they all felt strongly enough about the need that they did this. And so it's just kind of the way the cards fell. Totally understand it, but I think it is indicative that the providers feel that there is a ton of need out there for these type of things. I think it's not only need, I agree with you 100%, but it's also, I think, over the years, ILS has developed a lot of goodwill with the providers, and they believe that if they spend that time and attention, it will be seriously considered and often rewarded, but not always, but so that's good. And I know in the very early days, there are often these RFPs and there weren't proposals, and there weren't, there were fewer than there was money to give to. So I think it's good work by ILS, but also the need.
And I just add that I think it's an institutionalization of a change of culture, because years ago, counties were fighting the funding for family representation, fearful that they would displease, organizations and agencies that were on the other side of it. And now for so many to be applying, it's a reflection of how this has become a whole different board that we're working with.
That fear's still there.
We heard about that at the last board meeting.
Yeah.
Someone was told, don't apply for that funding. Yep.
But counties are, it's interesting because I've had the post-award and having conversations with the counties about the programs that they're going to be put into place. You're right, that concern is still there. But the counties are really starting to open up to, well, what does it really mean? In other words, really think about it. Like, is this as bad as what we really think, or is this something that have to say, we're talking primarily about representing people during the child welfare investigation. I think that while that concern is still there and still genuine, there's more openness than I've seen in the past few years, which is encouraging.
I do want to note as well that, we do take great pains to ensure that counties that do not receive one of the competitive awards know that they have the opportunity to have a debriefing session with ILS staff where we can talk them through, why the proposal they submitted may not have scored as highly as others. And I think the providers and counties that we've had those conversations with have appreciated it. And we've seen it pay off where we've had a conversation and they're able to, really tailor the next proposal that they send in to the RFP. But thank you, that's
No,
important feedback. Yeah.
aftershocks may be felt.
Yeah. Burton, I think that goes to Vince's point though about the goodwill that you're building with the providers. Because I think when you take that extra effort to then do the follow-up and the debrief and say why their proposal was not the strongest, I think they have a much better sense that it was taken very seriously. It was scored objectively, and that if they can address those shortcomings you identified, that they have a better chance in the future, which makes them more willing to do that in the future. So I think that goes to Vince's point.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Dylan, good morning. I'm so pleased to share with you the work that we're doing to support family representation providers to really capitalize on the family court representation funding that has been made available. Keeping track of this information is virtually impossible alone. I'm so thankful for my growing unit, all the members who have contributed, as well as the entirety of the ILS staff. They've really stepped in because we're small but mighty in the family representation unit. I'm going to contextualize a little bit of the implementation awards and implementation to give you an idea of what implementation really looks like. As mentioned by Burton, the family representation grants are currently offered competitively, which we know. All of our family court grants focus on and are dedicated to what is known as family defense, otherwise known as child welfare cases. We chose this deliberately because of the impact it can have on families, as well as the daunting aspect of confronting a state actor against a family. Like all other ILS contracts, the contracts for these grants are 3 years. And we have two types of family court grants, which Burton has mentioned today: the Model Family Representation Office Grant. Ooh. Those reflect best practice, of course, as demonstrated by the city institutional providers who have really pioneered this interdisciplinary representation for child welfare cases and have been doing that work for over 10 years. We also have the Family Defense, that's our shorthand for the Family Defense Child Welfare Quality Improvement and Caseload Reduction Grants. In addition to the funds dedicated for training for each of those, counties who have won this grant have elected one or more of 3 initiatives to improve the quality of representation. They can elect to work on caseload relief for the attorneys. They can elect to transform their practice by adding other professionals to the family representation team, social workers or parent advocates, otherwise known as interdisciplinary representation. And they can also opt to offer timely access to representation, meaning representation during a CPS or Child Protective Services investigation. Additionally, because these grants have so much flexibility in them, counties can choose how many providers will directly benefit from the funding, meaning the counties don't have to evenly distribute the funding. For example, sometimes the county chooses to emphasize caseload relief in an institutional office with the hope that that does relieve caseloads for others as well. We were able to basically make the awards in basically 3 waves. So I'm going to talk about them that way and also follow up with implementation that way. The first wave was January 2020 when we awarded the first family court model office grant to Westchester County, a county without an institutional provider for parent representation, and it was to be implemented and has been implemented by Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. That in that same way, we had the award for the second model office, also funded at the same level. It was announced in July 2021, and it was to be implemented by Monroe County Public Defender's Office. So implementation of those 2 grants is especially complicated. Recruiting staff and providing new space takes time, of course, but implementation for these first family court grants was made even more difficult by the pandemic. Face-to-face contact was initially not possible, and this slowed the completion of every single step necessary to hire new staff and proactively engage with the communities that they were hoping to serve. For the Westchester Model Office, they were not ready to take cases until April 2021, almost a year and a half after the award was made. We were very fortunate, however, in that this implementing organization had a long-standing relationship with all the community service providers. And because they'd served as a civil legal service provider for many years, those established relationships meant that we benefited from their ability to talk about timely access to the people they already knew and do very active community outreach. Those working to get Model Office 2 off the ground in Monroe County reported delays related to the delivery of the very basic equipment, desks, chairs, and computers for social workers, which meant that they had to delay hiring the social workers. Attorney staffing also proved very difficult initially as well. Once they were fully staffed, Model Office 2, by the end of 2022, they were able to focus the next year on intensive training with the Center for Family Representation. And they were also able to focus on their community outreach. The second wave of grant awards was in November 2021, was the first of the upstate family defense grants. I think Burton's already gone over the numbers, and those are also available to you on the handout that we sent around. I won't list the counties either because they're also on the handout. The next November, 1 year later, we were able to offer 17 upstate counties the second upstate family defense grant. Because counties who won Family Defense 1 were not precluded from submitting a proposal for Family Defense 2, two counties were able to secure funding for both Family Defense 1 and 2, Erie and Steuben. For Erie, a county that provides parent representation only through assigned counsel, winning both grants provided the necessary funding to not only ensure attorneys representing parents during a CPS investigation were compensated, but also to hire staff social workers that were immediately available for consulting with those parents during CPS investigations and to make access to the community services that might ameliorate the conditions that brought them to CPS attention. They also were kind of innovative in the community outreach. They actually did a very public campaign in that they had bus ads about how to contact for a lawyer during a CPS investigation, which was very exciting. So implementation of those two family defense grants, the second wave of implementation, if you will, was also still impacted by the lingering effects of the pandemic. Implementation was probably not as intensive as the model offices in terms of the number of staff that needed to be added or the infrastructure that needed to be built in order for them to take cases, but was still challenging based on the difficulty they were having with recruitment. Many providers emphasized new difficulty with attracting qualified applicants, especially in rural areas. This difficulty might have been exacerbated by a resumption of in-person court scheduling that required travel instead of appearing from your home. A typical experience for these grant implementers is if a county started work on implementation in the summer of 2022, they would not be able to take their first case under the grant until January of 2023. As you might have read in the report, we also, last September, ILS hosted a consortium, an in-person event for all family court grantee leadership. We did this because we wanted to be very responsive to the difficulties that counties were experiencing with their implementation. Attendees explored the ways that they had found solutions for common barriers. They shared their perspectives, especially in terms of community outreach, as many defender offices have not previously had the opportunity to engage their communities that way. The third family grants award wave, if you will, was late last year. The Family Defense Grant 3 was the same as funding as Set Family Defense 2, and as Burton just said, we also included eligibility for New York City as an entity equivalent to a county, and they did actually win that award. Additionally, 7 other counties were awarded that grant. And I can now say that we can talk about our winning county for Model Office 3, since we did announce it. It's Westchester, and they have elected, and they're very excited to continue the Model Office as administered through the legal services of the Hudson Valley, continuing the defense for parents. Implementation of these grants, especially in relation to newly created positions, takes time and sustained effort, assuming all goes as expected for the implementation of Family Defense 3 and the finalization of the contract for Model Office 3. ILS will have a funding presence in 27 upstate counties and New York City, supporting 51 providers. Of those 27, 26 are working to offer interdisciplinary representation, meaning they have either made room in their staff for hiring social workers or parent advocates, or they have set aside funding to contract with the same or both. Of those 27, 25 are working to implement timely access to counsel. Generally thought through a dedicated telephone number for parents to call if CPS is knocking. In a few counties, the local Department of Social Services has agreed to distribute a flyer or otherwise share information about how to contact someone for legal representation during that investigation. The second model office in Monroe County is one of those counties. Their DSS commissioner has publicly stated that as a social service agency, anyone adverse to parents knowing and or exercising their rights needs to reflect on that thinking. To further support our growing family grantee community, and as mentioned in the annual report, we plan to host another consortium this fall to problem solve some of the issues and hopefully find answers for the barriers. Although the existing funding isn't adequate for statewide caseload relief, as you know, the counties and providers are working with us to make the most of the funding that we do have. To impact the largest number of clients, we can't help but admire their commitment, their creativity, and their perseverance, as demonstrated by how often they apply for grants and how quickly they want to implement them. We do hope that the data collection that follows the awards will provide even more substantive proof of the necessity of providing funding for family court public defense, as demonstrated by Model Office 1 that has been running for 3 years. The addition of state funding to parent representation, the results are profound. In the last 3 years, out of 162 investigation representation cases closed, only 17 were indicated in the state central registry, only 2 resulted in the filing of an Article 10, and only 1 resulted in a child being removed from their home. We hope that we get results like that everywhere.
Your question, thank you.
God's work, you're doing God's work.
It's a pleasure.
Well, and the counties are, I mean, as Lucy said, they're not giving up. So even when it's hard to get the money, we have counties that would apply multiple times and finally get it. And then they face the barrier of getting, going through the county bureaucracy to get the position approved. And then they have to fill it. And, it's a difficult hiring climate right now for any type of public sector work. And yet our counties are filling these positions. It's taking time. They want to fill them yesterday. But they're doing it. And I think as of 2023, 80% of all the positions funded up through the Family Defense 3, because those contracts haven't finished yet, are filled, right?
88 for attorney positions and 80 for everybody else who is contemplated, yeah. So.
Right, we're on to office updates.
Office updates, good. So since September, when I last provided an office update, ILS has been joined by a number of new staff. So I just want to quickly, announce them. We've been joined by Wakidula Ataki, who is our new contract manager in our grants unit. Dai Nguyen, who is a family court program associate with Lucy's Family Representation Unit. Enrico Parita, who is a criminal defense representation counsel for Region G, which is the Finger Lakes region. Ketienne Telemac, who is our criminal defense representation counsel for Region A, which covers New York City as well as Long Island. Carolyn Walter, who is our new appellate attorney in the Western New York Regional Support Center out in Buffalo. Jill Christ, who is the administrative assistant for our Western New York Regional Support Center. Nathan Baum, who just joined us as Assistant Grants Manager 2 in our grants unit. And we will be joined starting next Thursday by Claudia Troop, who is with us here today, who is going to be our new Director of Post-Conviction and Appellate Representation. So we're thrilled to have them on board, coming on board. Everyone has been just a really wonderful addition to the office. And as of right now, we have just a total of 5 positions that are vacant that we are currently posting for or about to be posting for. That's a family court appellate attorney position that will be housed in our statewide appellate support center. An assistant appellate counsel position in the statewide appellate support center. An assistant director of information technology. A grants administrator for our grants unit. And a criminal defense representation counsel for Region D, which is the North Country. That's the office update.
Questions? Thank you. Looks like we've come to the end of the agenda.
Yeah.
So I think we can adjourn.
Thanks.
Thank you.